Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson. It is Tuesday, March 6th, Election Day, and love to know if you have voted. We're going to spend most of our time talking about voting and the Texas election. And again, part of this is because we're broadcasting on the second day that we have now moved to the 12 o'clock hour, the noontime hour on 1160 a.m. And if you are just used to hearing us at 9 o'clock in the morning, now you have a chance to hear us at 12 o'clock. And so this is an opportunity for us to focus some time and attention on what's happening here in the state of Texas. But this is one of those stories that even though we're looking at it in Texas perspective, the nation is sort of looking at it as well in terms of the fact that this is really the first primary of the 2018 election season. And there are going to be all sorts of people tonight that will be looking at this, trying to glean any kind of assumption as to whether or not there is a backlash to President Donald Trump, whether Democrats are going to be able to take over some seats in the United States Congress, in Texas, and places like that. So we'll see where that goes. And so we're going to spend most of our time and attention talking about the election, about voting, give you some facts and figures and other information. Let me just mention that a little bit later, if we have some time, we might talk about what was sort of a nonstop rolling train wreck, actually, in which you had a former Trump campaign aide, Sam Nunberg, who made basically nonstop appearances on all sorts of cable news shows because, first of all, he was taunting the special counsel, Robert Mueller, by saying that he would not comply with the special counsel, and even dared Robert Mueller to arrest him. But that wasn't the thing that seemed to garner the attention from the networks. He also, and some people now wonder whether or not he was inebriated, we'll get into that in just a minute, actually said that he thinks that there is evidence that at least the investigators have evidence that the Trump campaign actually did collude with the Russians. Well, that brought all sorts of individuals actually bumping some of their lead stories at ABC and CBS and other places to put him front and center. Then when he was on some live shows, at one point even asked, "Are you drinking? Have you been drinking?" And some people have even wondered whether or not he had been drinking again. So there are some questions raised about some of the things that he said. So we may get into that a little bit later. But I want to focus our time and attention today on the elections and give you some very important principles. Some of these can be found in a booklet that we make available here at Point of View. It's called Making Your Vote Count. And one of the things I thought I would do is offer for any of you that call into the program today, we'll send you a free copy of this. It's a 14-page booklet. I'm going to be summarizing a lot of this as we go through our presentation today, but if you would like a copy, obviously it's going to be too late for your election today, but it will certainly be relevant for the fact that we'll have the general elections, and also just to begin to think about some of these issues from a perspective, a biblical perspective, but also in terms of some of the practical issues. But the first thing we're going to be hearing about tonight, and we'll see what the final totals are the number of Democrats that have actually voted early. Nevertheless, that is just kind of depends on which counties you're looking at. But if you look at the state's 15 largest counties, our first article here talks about the fact that about 10,000 more people voted in the Democratic primary elections than in the Republican primary elections. However, you would go to, for example, Houston region there, Republicans are still outvoting Democrats, but maybe not by the margins that they did 4 years ago. Harris County had about 35,000 people voted in the Republican primary, 34,000 in the Democratic primary, and that was, of course, a couple of days ago. A more recent one has certainly looked at, again, what is taking place there as well. And if nothing else, midterm elections are a time when people tended to vote less. There is a much bigger and greater turnout, first of all, during the general election than a primary. And there's much more of a turnout during a presidential election than an off-year election. That being said, this news story that just came out here said that despite midterm elections drawing much less interest than presidential elections, by Saturday, more than 885,000 people in Texas had voted early or by mail. And that's a 50% increase from 2014, which marked the previous high of 592,000. Now, sometimes what you have is more people vote early, and then it doesn't necessarily follow that then more people vote during the actual election day. So we'll see where that plays itself out. But I thought one of the interesting races that some people are going to be watching is going to be for the Texas Land Commissioner. Let's face it, when you talk about Ted Cruz, he's going to win his primary. When you talk about Greg Abbott, he's going to win his primary. Dan Patrick, you go all the way down the line. But this is one that's kind of interesting, and that's because it involves the name Bush, and it also involves a person that before had been the land commissioner. And so let me just read this piece from Andrew O'Reilly. He said, Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush also got Donald Trump's endorsement, with the president saying the nephew and grandson of the two former presidents backed me when I wasn't the politically correct thing to do, and I back him now. And again, Andrew O'Reilly points out that unlike Cruz or Abbott or Patrick or Paxton, incumbents who are expected to easily win the Republican nomination in their campaigns, George P. Bush is facing a tough battle against his predecessor in the land office, and that's Jerry Patterson. And a University of Texas Tribune poll found that when voters were allowed to be undecided, Bush mustered only 36% of the vote in the race. So he goes on to say it seems to have seen that whether or not the Trump endorsement will help or hurt Bush, but either way, it puts the politician in a strange situation, you think? Because as he tries to merge the backing of the anti-establishment president, that would be Donald Trump, with that of the storied political family, of course, that would be the Bush family. The Bush dynasty was built on moderate political and conservative policy positions and was strongly against Donald Trump in the 2016 election, where George P.'s father, that would be Jeb Bush, by the way, ran against him. So we'll be watching that particular race because it does kind of have a Bush versus Trump. It's actually, of course, Bush versus Patterson issue. But when we come back from the break, what I want to try to do is kind of talk through this issue of voting. And you might want to take some notes. This is, again, some material that I'm going to cover in the booklet, Making Your Vote Count. So, again, as we open up the phones, we certainly want to give you a chance to express your opinion, but also we'll send you a free booklet just so that you will have some of the facts and figures that I'm going to give you, because we're going to look at, first of all, what does the Bible have to say about our citizenship? We have, I would say, a citizenship both on earth and in heaven. What about this issue of church and politics? And I want to try to explain that that depends on how you define the word church. If you mean the institutional church, that's one answer. If you mean the church in terms of Christians being involved, well, that's a different answer. How do we think about government? What should we do? And then the whole issue of our stewardship of the vote. We find that a lot of people are not registered to vote for, I think, a fallacious reason. That is, well, they think if they were registered to vote, they would be picked for jury duty. Well, they pick the jury roles for more than just that. Some people aren't going to vote this time because they've fed up with these negative ads, and we're going to talk about that and certainly want to get your comments about the most contentious campaigns I think we've ever seen before. And so we have a lot to cover. We will talk about how to think about voting as a citizen, all that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the tax reform bill that Congress passed in December will remove the individual mandate to have a government-approved health insurance plan starting next year. Callers to my radio program wonder if that will allow them to buy a low-cost health insurance plan. That isn't so easy to answer. Dr. Merrill Matthews was on my radio program a few weeks ago and suggested to members of Congress how they could provide a clear answer. His recent article in The Hill provides a clear action plan for Congress. There is a reason that insurance plans under Obamacare were so expensive. In order to qualify under the federal guidelines, every plan had to include what were called essential health benefits. These mandated coverages and requirements made health insurance plans more expensive. Now that the individual mandate is lifted, many Americans would like to buy a less expensive insurance policy. In fact, many would like to buy the policy they had before Obamacare prohibited insurance companies from providing them. You may remember that President Obama claimed that if you like your health plan, you can keep it. Unfortunately, millions of Americans were not allowed to keep the policy they had before Obamacare kicked in. The solution is for Congress to allow insurance companies to offer non-qualified health insurance plans. In other words, allow them to offer plans that Americans had before Obamacare disqualified them. Many callers complain that the policies that they are forced to buy now are too expensive and have such high deductibles that they are essentially useless to them. Idaho recently announced that it would test the situation under the current law. It will allow insurers to offer comprehensive coverage outside of the Obamacare exchanges that does not include mandates. No doubt its decision will be challenged in the courts, and that is why Congress should clarify the current situation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Election Day, we're going to spend some time talking about voting, and if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things we want to provide to you if you do call in is this booklet, 14 pages, Making Your Vote Count. But let's, for just a few minutes, talk about some of the biblical principles. Then we're going to get into the stewardship of the vote, and that is found in this new booklet that we're making available to you. But first of all, just to think about our citizenship. You know, you can see that if you look in Scripture, for example, that Philippians 3:20 says our citizenship is in heaven. But at the same time, I think it's fair to point out that we also are citizens of this earth. For example, the Apostle Paul used his Roman citizenship to advance the gospel. And so being a citizen on earth as well as a citizen in heaven, I think makes some sense. As a matter of fact, in John 17 here, Jesus talks about the fact that he has sent us into the world. We're to be in the world, but not of the world. So certainly we have, I think, as I'm going to talk about in just a minute, a stewardship responsibility as citizens. But that raises, of course, a question that surfaces so often. Should the church be involved in politics? Well, that depends on your definition of church. If by church you mean the body of Christ, well, then I think Christians are to be involved in all sorts of aspects of society. We're the salt of the earth and the light of the world. 2 Corinthians 5 says that we are ambassadors. That means if you're in the business world, you're an ambassador for Christ in the business world. If you're in the political arena, well, then I think you're an ambassador for Christ in the political arena. And I have friends that have been involved in politics. I'm a precinct chairman, so I recognize that if you're talking about should individual Christians as part of the body of Christ be involved, well, sure, we should be in education, and we should be in business, and we should be in politics, we should be in the culture, we should be involved really even in our own neighborhoods and communities as ambassadors. If, on the other hand, you're saying, well, should the institution of the church be involved in politics? Well, no, that would be very different. Jesus himself even talked about this, if you think about it, because at one point he was asked, should they pay the poll tax? You might remember what Jesus said. Well, give me a coin. Okay, whose likeness is on the coin? Caesar's. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Render unto God the things that are God's. So this idea of a separation of church, the institution of church, and the government, well, you even find that in the New Testament. You find that in the early church. You find that even in the establishment documents of this country. So you can see that certainly we recognize that the church as an institution is an ecclesiastical institution. The government is, of course, the state. It's a civil institution. So there is a separation between civil and ecclesiastical functions. But how do we think about government as an entity? Because in a sense, as you go to vote today, or if you already have voted, you are in a sense putting people in the government. So how should we think about the government? Well, Romans 13 gives us a very good answer to that, because it tells us in particular that government is established by God. Let me read it for you. It says, every person is to be subjection unto the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. And so we see that in Romans 13, verse 1. And so really the Bible's kind of teaching us that God establishes the forms of government that rule the nations. And of course, then we find ourselves in a unique situation. When Paul wrote that to Christians in Rome, they could not vote in the Roman Senate. They could not vote in the Caesar. But we find ourselves in a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So our first and most influential way to be involved with government is by voting. And so we have a chance to elect leaders who are responsible as our representatives in government, both at the federal level, state, and local level. So those are some things that we should think about. So I would say that we do have a civic responsibility to vote. I would also say that we have a civic responsibility to do some other things in society, to serve on a jury, to contact your legislators. And that brings me to the first question that we do address in the booklet, and that is, why do so many Christians not vote? And there's a couple of reasons. First of all, sometimes they're not registered to vote. We've had talk show hosts on this program with me before that have pointed out, as they've done surveys, find that sometimes people are not registered to vote because they think, well, that would mean I'd have to serve on a jury. Well, first of all, I think you should serve on a jury. Don't we want Christians on juries to render good decisions? If we don't, then we turn the jury system over to people that would disagree with us. So that's, I think, important. But more importantly, it's just fallacious, because most juries and those who are being impaneled to serve on a jury are selected from things other than just the voter rolls. But the other one that I think I'd like to get your comments about is so many people are tired of negative campaigning. And if you are in the Dallas area listening to this broadcast, as you are, you have probably seen more television ads that just make your teeth ache. You just get so tired of watching those. And I've had a lot of people respond by saying, well, I don't like these negative ads, so I'm not going to vote for either candidate. My quick response to them is, so you want more of those? No, I want less of them. Well, understand, the reason negative ads work is because it suppresses the vote. If I can't get you to vote for my candidate, I'll prevent you from voting for my opponent. And so this is why political consultants have been telling candidates for years that they need to have negative ads. My argument would be, don't let the negative ads influence you. Look beyond the negative ads and do indeed vote. Because if we continue to not vote, we're going to just send a signal that negative ads work, and we're going to get more of those. And I think all of us have had enough of those negative ads. Well, real quickly, what are some other passages that relate to this? Well, certainly 1 Peter 2 talks about the fact that you should submit yourselves for the Lord's sake for every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as set by him for punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. So I think we could say that as we look at some of those verses, at the very least we should obey those in authority. But then we also see that we have another responsibility. In 1 Timothy 2, it says, "First of all, then, I urge that entreaties and prayers, petitions, and thanksgivings be made on behalf of all men, for kings and all who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness." So not only should we obey those in authority, we should pray for those in authority. And we've had people on this program in the past that have pointed out that the way that you can pray for those in authority would be those individuals who are part of what you would call your key 16. 16 people who are in authority over you. Who would those be? Well, that first of all would be the president, and then it would be the 9 Supreme Court justices, then it would be your 2 United States senators, it would be your representative, it would be your governor, it would be your state senator and your state representative, and those are 16 people. Now, you might add others if you want to. It could be your mayor, a city council, whatever. But those are 16 people that I believe we should be in prayer for. And yet when I ask people if they can even name who those 16 people are, even if they could name one of the people on the Supreme Court, they usually aren't able to do so. And so it, again, I think brings us back to this real important issue of the fact that we should obey those in authority, we should pray for those in authority, and today, we should vote for those in authority, and then again, we'll have a chance to vote in November. So I want to take a break, and when I come back, I want to talk more about the stewardship of the vote. And in particular, I want to ask this question. Does one vote make a difference? And I'll start by looking at the big elections, the 2000 presidential election, the 2004 presidential election, and then we'll just look maybe to the most recent one, the 2016 presidential election. Then I want to look at some of these statewide offices. Do you realize that one individual serving in the Texas legislature right now was elected by 23 votes? And then I want to share about a few of the closest votes in American history. These ended up as ties. Don't tell me that one vote doesn't make a difference. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, one from Illinois, one from Ohio, and then I could use one from Virginia, which is even more intriguing because one vote made a difference not only in one Republican that was elected, but that gave the Republicans a majority, so the one vote not only elected that individual, but it changed who was in control of the Virginia legislature. So we got lots of stories like that. Then I want to get real practical. How do I get information about candidates? Where can I go? How can I find out which precinct I'm in? How can I find out how they might vote? How can I get good voter material? So we're going to make all of that available to you. And if you've already voted, great. But if you have not, I know that some have not. I started getting emails this morning, interestingly enough, from individuals that indeed said, who am I going to vote for today? So we're going to come back and give you some practical solutions for that right after these important messages.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 16th. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Election day today, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Did you vote today? Did you have any difficulty actually getting into the polls, or have you voted early? And what about some of these negative campaign ads? Those are a couple of questions on the table, and I'm going to spend some time now working my way through this booklet, Making Your Vote Count. We've already mentioned a few things in the booklet, but again, we'll make that available to those of you that call in today. So 1-800-351-1212. Let me, if nothing else, answer the question that comes up every once in a while. Does my one vote really make a difference? And I thought I'd start at the big level. We'll look at a couple of the presidential elections and realize how close those were. Then I'll go to a couple of the statewide elections, which have been so close as well. And I'll just pick the most recent ones because there have been some that have been very close. And then I thought I'd end for just a few minutes with the closest elections in American history. Then we'll get into some of the practical questions of where do I find information out, even at this 11th hour, so that I know who the candidates are, where they stand on the issues, and maybe some other information. But let's start with the presidential elections, and I thought we'd go back to 2000, closest election perhaps in American history. You've got to realize that George W. Bush was elected essentially by 527 votes in Florida. And that was so significant. For some of our younger listeners, they may not be aware of some of the back and forth about the Supreme Court and all the rest. But again, 527 vote margin in the state of Florida elected George W. Bush over Al Gore. What's even more intriguing is if you could change 5,381 votes in 4 different states, it would have resulted in a 269-269 tie, which would have been something we have never seen before in the American experience. And when then you look at both the Senate and the House, you see again how close it was, because the Senate at that time ended up with a 50-50 tie. 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, until one individual who's a Republican said, you know, I'm more of an independent. I maybe will caucus with the Democrats. But again, a 50-50 tie in the Senate elections. And even in the House of Representatives, if you did a collective shift of about 5,493 votes in 5 districts, you would have put Democrats in charge. Dick Gephardt would have been the Speaker of the House instead. So you can see that was an unbelievably close election. And don't tell me that one vote doesn't make a difference. Well, 4 years later, you have again an election. And in this particular case, the presidential election was decided by the state of Ohio. George Bush won the state's 20 electoral votes by 50.8% of the vote. And many people believe that he won that in large part because Christians turned out. You had 13 different states that had marriage protection amendments. And so because those were passed in 13 states, including Ohio, that was the difference most likely, and the margin of that allowed George W. Bush to be reelected for 4 more years. Well, let's fast forward to the most recent election, the 2016 election. And when all the votes were totaled, the electoral votes for Donald Trump were supposed to be 306 to Hillary Clinton's 232. But we had something else happen, and that is some of the electors, since they were not necessarily pledged and they were not required to vote, they didn't. And so what you ended up with, the actual vote totals that came when they were announced in January, where Donald Trump got 304 electoral votes, Hillary Clinton got 227 electoral votes, Colin Powell got 3 electoral votes, John Kasich got an electoral vote, Ron Paul got an electoral vote, Bernie Sanders got an electoral vote, and Faith Spotted Eagle got an electoral vote. And so you can see that that could have changed things if indeed he did not get the requisite number of electoral votes to actually be considered president of the United States. Of course, as we pointed out just a minute ago, Sam Nunberg was traveling around to all the various cable shows yesterday arguing that maybe there was some kind of collusion with the Russians. We'll see how that plays out, but I'm a little bit skeptical. But even here, again, if you look at the votes, this one isn't as close as the others, but still pretty close. If you look at about 80 votes in 3 states, those are what essentially elected Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. So when we look at these presidential elections, we can see how close the votes were. Well, let's look at a couple of other issues. Matt Rinaldi's been on this program with us before, and in House District 116, he was elected by 1,100 votes. So just a 1,000-vote difference in that particular one. But what is so intriguing is that Briscoe Cain actually was in a runoff by 714 votes, but when the runoff votes were finally counted, he won by 23 votes. Individual in the Texas House of Representatives in the runoff was elected by 23 votes. We are talking about obviously less than 1 vote per precinct, and it shows you again how close many of these elections are. But before I wind it down, let me, if nothing else, just to put a smile on your face, talk about the 2 closest elections in American history, because these are pretty amazing. The first one has to do with Penny Pullen. Now, for some of you that have been listening to Point of View for a long period of time might actually remember that she occasionally was on this program with us, and I've done other programs with her on Moody Broadcasting. She served for many years as the Illinois State Representative. Well, in a primary that was where it was contested, they actually concluded after some voter irregularities. She's in Illinois. You know, in Illinois, they talk about vote early, vote often. So they had some what are called voter irregularities. They finally did the best to conclude that probably it ended in a tie. They couldn't sort it out any better than that. And so when you have a tie election, what do? Well, Judge Francis Barth decided that they would flip a coin. They flipped the coin, and she lost. And so she retired from the Illinois State Representative in the Illinois State House. Here's the rest of the story. When she went to church that Sunday, she had a few dozen people come up to her and said, "Oh, Penny, if I'd known that it was going to be so close, I would have voted." Some said, "Well, I came home late at night and it was dark, so I decided I wouldn't go and vote." Or some of them said, "Well, I was out of town. I should have got an absentee ballot." If just one of those church members, and certainly there were dozens, she recounted, that said, "I did not vote, and if I'd known how important it was, I would have voted." If just one of them had voted for her, she would perhaps still be serving in the Illinois State Legislature. Isn't that amazing? But the all-time favorite one, this is the one that definitely puts a smile on my face, happened in Ohio. And this is where it was a definite tie. It's amazing because William Crawford and Gene Miller came up with an exact tie. It was for a city council race. And so, again, they had to flip a coin. But here's the real issue. William Crawford has 2 sons. Neither of them voted for him because neither of them voted. One of the sons lives at home. The other son lives across the street. And neither of his sons bothered to actually go and vote. And so, don't you imagine it was a little bit tense around the Thanksgiving dinner that year. But nevertheless, that just gives you an idea of how close some of these elections are. Now, as we go to a break, let me just mention a couple of things. First of all, you might say, well, where do I get election information? If you're in Dallas County, Collin County, Denton County, Tarrant County, wherever you are, type in Collin County election, Tarrant County election, Dallas County election information. And when you go to that website, you will see a couple of things. First of all, it will tell you where the polling places are. Number 2, if you actually scan down, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see that you can actually get a sample ballot. And so get out your voter ID card, figure out which precinct you're in, and you can then get a sample ballot printed out, and then you can begin to evaluate who you're going to vote for before you even go into the polling place. Well, that brings the next question up, and that is, how do I get information? Well, the good news is that there are all sorts of what are called multi-group primary guides, and you can type in those primary voter guides for your particular county. I've seen them for the entire state of Texas, but, again, I did mine for Collin County, but you can do it for Dallas County. You can do it for Denton County. Had somebody call me the other day and said, I need information. Since I didn't know what county it was in, I sent him one for Denton, one for Dallas, and one for Collin County. I figured I would then have covered that. And you can see how they voted. But you might say, okay, that's good. That shows me, how Texas Right to Life voted on, whether they endorsed him or Empower America or whatever. If you'd like to really see how they've answered their questions on these various questionnaires, when we come back, I'll talk about how you can even get that information. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1977, the Internal Revenue Service tried to declare that Catholic nuns operating in a hospital was not a, quote, religious function. Congress responded by amending the Employment Retirement Income Securities Act, or ERISA, to prevent the IRS from deciding what is or is not a church. Nonetheless, class action lawyers recently tried to argue that because some religious hospitals established pension plans, ERISA's exemptions did not apply because those plans were not established by a church. Well, a unanimous Supreme Court recently rejected that reasoning. The court recognized that Congress's amendment of ERISA continues to protect religious organizations from the burdens of ERISA, foreclosing the possibility that the IRS could bankrupt a religious organization simply because it does not believe the organization is religious enough. First Liberty Institute filed a friend of the court brief in this case on behalf of several religious organizations. As my colleague Justin Butterfield said of the decision in Advocate Healthcare Network versus Stapleton, quote, the history of the United States of America is one requiring the government to respect the religious freedom and autonomy of its houses of worship and religious organizations. The Supreme Court's decision respects that great history and tradition, allowing churches, synagogues, mosques, and religious ministries to pursue their religious mission without the weight of government bureaucracy and regulation hindering their efforts and intruding upon their mission. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Again, it's Election Day. Just want to give you some more information about voting. And again, for those of you that are even at this 11th hour say, I need to get some more information. First of all, go to election information for your particular county. Then you will be able to find out where you can vote today. You can also get a sample ballot. And then I've suggested that you can actually do a Google search, because Google knows all, for many of these summaries that have been created. There's one that's called the Multi-Group Conservative GOP Primary Voter Guide. That's one that I've used before. I've been able to find them for Collin County and Denton County and Dallas County and Tarrant County and all sorts of things, Parker County and all the rest. So that's one to find. But let me mention another that we've talked about on this program before, and it's called iVoter Guide. Now, this one I like because, first of all, it gives you a real specific set of values and evaluations. So when you go to iVoter Guide, you will find, first of all, that you can type in your address, which is helpful because lots of times people don't even know their precinct number. So as long as you know your address, you're good. Then what will pop up is all sorts of information. First of all, let's look at the Senate races, the U.S. Senate race, and it will, for example, show you either the Republican or Democratic side. But let's just do the Republican for a minute because you'll have Ted Cruz and a number of other people that have challenged him. And then it gives a rating, whether they're very conservative, somewhat conservative, moderate, somewhat liberal, very liberal. And so it's red or blue. Now you can right off the bat say, okay, now I understand a little bit more about where these individuals are, how they filled out their surveys, how they filled out their questionnaires. But you might say, okay, I trust the panel that is put together, and these are very reputable individuals that Richard Ford and others have put together. But okay, you might say, I want to see how they answered it themselves. Well, everything on that page is pretty much clickable, so you can click on there and say, oh, okay, here's how that individual answered those questions. Okay, I can see why that individual was listed as maybe somewhat conservative compared to someone else who was very conservative. Okay, so you can start seeing those particular issues pretty quickly. And so that's just another resource that I think would be very helpful for you as you are making your decisions. Now, one of the things I wanted to do before we end the program today is do a citizenship quotient, and that is something that is in our booklet. I mentioned Richard Ford. He came up with this years ago. And so if you get a perfect score, you get 100. But here's what he suggests to help you evaluate how you're doing as a citizen, because that's really what we're talking about here today. So first of all, you need to name your legislators. If you can name your 2 U.S. senators, you get 10 points, essentially 5 for each one. But you get 10 points if you can name your 2 senators. You get an additional 10 points if you can name your representative. And then you get 10 more points if you can name your state senator, and 10 more points if you can name your state representative. So that would give you 40 points. Now, you might say, well, how does everybody else do? Richard Ford has found over the years that only 5% of the people he's ever worked with can get 40 points. Again, 10 points for your 2 senators, 1 point for your representative, another point for your state senator, another point for your state representative. So how do I get the other 60 points? Well, you get 10 points if you are registered to vote, which I hope you are. You get 10 more points if you've prayed for one of those legislators. And then you get 10 points if you've contacted one of those legislators. So that now gets you up to 70 points. And then you get 10 points each if you voted in the last 3 elections. So if you voted in the 2014 and 2016 and you're voting today in the 2018, or you want to go back one and go 2012, 2014, 2016, however you want to do that. And so again, indeed, if you have done all of those, you'd have 100 points. Well, how do most people do? Again, one of the things he found is the average score was 20.6, which it just is amazing to me, because look at this. If you just voted in one of these, first of all, if you're registered to vote and you voted just in one election, you'd have 20 points. If you voted in 2 of the last elections, you'd have 30 points. But it just shows you we have a lot of work to do in terms of citizenship. And so after that, maybe as you're listening to that, you're going, okay, well, how do I find out that? I mean, I wish I knew, but I don't. I don't know who my state senator is. I don't know who my state representative is. The other day, matter of fact, early this morning, somebody wanted to know who was actually on the State Board of Education. I will have a good answer for that one as well. One last practical comment. You can type in who represents me, because that's the website called Who Represents Me. And again, type in your address. All you need to know is your address. And what it does is then it pops up your 2 United States senators, and it's clickable, so it will take you to their websites. It will point up your representative, and it takes you, again, not only give you the information, but goes to those websites. And then it pops up your state senator and your state representative, and it gives you his or her, first of all, district office, and then Austin office. and that it even gives you your State Board of Education person. So again, who represents me? And the good news is when we look at all of this, there's just so much great information. And in the old days, it used to be very difficult to find some of this information. The reality is we now are blessed because of computers to have access to so much of that information. So if you have not voted because you say, I don't know some of the candidates and I wish I knew more about them, I've already pointed to you to a couple of these particular group endorsements. I've pointed you to iVoter Guide. Then if you say, I don't even know who my representatives are, you've convicted me, maybe I should at least pray for them. Well, again, go who represents me, and that will give you the information you might need. Well, just before we wind down today, let me mention that I've posted a couple of other very good articles, which we did not get to today. We might talk about some of those tomorrow, although Jonathan Sands is going to be with us. We're going to kind of handicap and evaluate what's happened in the campaign. But one of the articles is by our friend David French, who's been in the studio with us, and it's really well written. It says, Why the Left Won't Win the Gun Control Debate. He's written an article recently in the Atlantic just trying to help individuals that maybe don't understand what he calls the gun culture to understand. And he said, when I've seen the responses to some of these people, it just shows me there is such a division that we're probably never going to see any kind of gun control legislation passed. We're not even going to see any kind of civility because people simply don't understand the issue. And one of the other articles has to do with the issue of the Trump tariffs, and we're going to get into that more probably tomorrow. Certainly we'll get into it by our Friday weekend edition. So again, if you would like to find some of that information, it is available at our website, which is pointofview.net. You can go there and find those articles and find information about elections. And again, even if you would, after the fact, like to maybe get a copy of that Making Your Vote Count booklet, it is available to you because we certainly want to make that available to you and certainly encourage you today to exercise your citizenship responsibility. As I said, we're both citizens in heaven, but we're also citizens on earth. And there is no excuse for us not casting an informed vote, although the reality is very few people vote in the primaries, which some people have estimated that means that if you vote today, your vote is almost 5 times more powerful than it is during a typical general election because so few people vote. And if in November, when we have the general election, you don't like the candidates that you're supposed to vote about, well, that goes back to what did you do in the primaries to select those individuals that are running in the general election. Let's take a break. When we come back, Penna Dexter will be sitting here, and she will be carrying on the interview right here on Point of View. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.